And we're back. We're back for Hello World. This lovely application right here. So what are we going to be doing with Hello World? Well, we talked about the beginnings of our project and how it's going to look, right? We said that you have a toolbar on the left side that allows us, when we actually create a Visual Studio 2012 C# project, with a lot of the tools we can use to drag and drop, right? So if I go back into our app here, and again, I'm going to go into Unity mode again because I think it's probably easier for me to switch back and forth. And here we go. So I'm creating a new project. This time, I want you to create the Hello World project, right? So let's go into Visual Studio 2012 and click New Project. And down here, I want you to rename it Hello World. Hello World. Okay. Now for me, I've already got a Hello World project, so it'll detect that I'm trying to create another one. So I'm going to create a Hello World 2. You can make it whatever you like. Mine's going to be Hello World 2. Again, it's a Windows Form application, and I'm going to click OK. If you notice here on the bottom left, before I click OK, remember we talked about source code in the last video. Down here is where you can add to source control. Okay, I'm not going to cover this because there are brilliant tools in Visual Studio that help you do source control. I'm teaching you a way to do it externally, only from an ease of use perspective. But it's awesome, the stuff that you can do within Visual Studio. That again, it's outside a little bit of our course deliverables. Yes.
What is source control?
Version control.
Oh,
okay. So again, I'm creating my project. Here's my form. And now we switch back to our instructions here. So I created my form. And there's different parts. There's a Solution Explorer window on the right-hand side that appears here. My document window that's in the middle. These are the names of all these things. And this is my IDE, right? And my properties window is on the right. So if I go back to my Visual Studio here really quickly, here's my form. And when I click on my object, in this particular case my form, this property on the right is relative to the object that I've clicked. Now, I have sorted it, and I recommend you sorting it alphabetical and not leaving it the way it is within Visual Studio. And again, if you don't have your Visual Studio ready, and you can see the video of what I'm doing here. The reason why is because if everything is alphabetical, I can find my properties a lot faster than if I have it set up in a different manner. So again, I would recommend alphabetical. Also, the other thing I've got clicked here is properties. You can unclick that as well, okay? But I recommend you click it. So right now my form 1 is called Form 1. That's a very simple form that I'm using here, okay? Going back to the presentation. Again, for my toolbox, we talked about that's where all my controls are. And again, we talked about the different modes. The design time mode that we're in right now, we haven't run. The runtime mode when I'm actually running, what's supposed to happen within runtime. And the break time mode or debug mode that happens when there's an error that I have to fix. Okay? We're going to actually cover debugging in another section, another lesson altogether. Okay, so we've set up the project, we've named it, and let's talk about planning the project a little bit. We talked about doing planning, but we haven't done any planning. We just launched an application, and we're going to drag some objects onto it right now, right? So let's talk about the planning a little bit. So again, what I want to do is I want to try and resize the form. So here's some of our stuff I want you to do. So the way I can resize the form, and if I go back to Visual Studio, is I can just grab these handles, right? So here's the handles in the form. I can resize the form any way I want. So I encourage you to do this with me. So now I've made the form a little bigger. If I want to have an exact size for the form, I want to have control, Visual Studio allows you to do this. And actually, right here, if I click the plus on the size property in my property inspector right here on the right side, I can actually specify the height and width. So if I want my form to be exactly 300 wide by 300 high or tall, I can do that, right? Or if I want to drag and drop it to a specific size that seems comfortable for me in a particular application, I can do that as well. But you can specify 300 by 300. Again, there's a lot of little properties that each form has. Here, all I've done is specified the height and width of my form, or I can drag it around. Okay. I'm going to place a label and 2 button controls on the form using my toolbox, and I'm going to lock the controls in place. Let's do that now. So again, here's a label. I'm going to drag and drop the label on the form. Here we go. Look. I'm putting it somewhere in the middle of the screen. I'm not specifying where exactly I want to put it. If I do want to specify it, and if you notice the property inspector has changed now, so it's pointing at the label. If I click on the form, it shifts back to the form. Click on the label, it shifts back to the label. I actually can control the properties of where I'm looking depending on what I've clicked. So here's my label, and if I want to specify a size, so my label right now is 35 by 13. If I want to make it so it's 40, and I go 40 in there, it shifts back because on the top of my form here, I have an auto size property that's set to true right now. I'd have to change that to false to set the size of my form. I can also set the location, like where my form exists, like right now, my label, I mean. My label right now is at 123 and 27 relative to the top left corner of my form. Okay? Remember that in computers, the top left corner is 0, 0, not the bottom left like it is for math. Okay? Just saying it out there for people who don't know, without asking silly questions and making you embarrassed. People are embarrassed, put their hand up saying, I don't know the coordinate system of computers. It's okay. So top left is where the 0, 0 is on the form. So if I want to move it to the right more, and if I want to move it to 200, then I type 200, not 2000, 200, and it moves over exactly to where I want it. So I can really specify from an absolute value for my form control, right? Again, WPF, you know, if you're going to do those kind of forms, it's more relative positioning as a default. Okay, I want to drag a couple buttons now. So here's my first button. Whoop. And if you notice, this little line, this little alignment line comes up automatically, right, to align my button with my label. I'm not doing it, it's doing it for me, right? So I'm putting it somewhere in the middle. Here's my button, and then I'm going to drag another button, and if you notice, as soon as I do that, it aligns with the other controls as well, automatically. So here's my other button. So I got a label and 2 buttons on my form. Okay. So I really haven't done anything yet. If I launch my app, if you notice, I'm launching my app. I got my label and 2 buttons, but if I click on the button or try and mess with the label, it doesn't do anything right now because I haven't programmed any event handlers. Click on there, going back to the form. Oh, one thing I should do is they recommend that you lock the form when you're working with it so the controls don't shift around. So if I right-click onto the form itself and click Lock Controls, right? What this does is it doesn't allow me to move my controls around by accident. That's what this doesn't do, okay? I also, if you notice, can't resize my form now anymore. It's locked to this particular size so I don't make mistakes, okay? Not a bad practice. Not always necessary, though. If you're very careful, you don't need to do that. So I'm going to unlock it for now. Now I can move things around. If you notice my arrow, my cursor changes now. Whereas if I lock my form, I can't do anything. My cursor doesn't allow me to move anything around at all. Okay. So let's shift back. So here's some stuff we want to try and do. So here's where it says change the following properties. I want to change the label to message label, the name of my label, and the text, I want to delete it. All right? So if I shift back to my Visual Studio, I click on my label, here it is, and the label itself is an object, right? The object is right now called label 1. This object name is going to be carried forward inside the code. So if I want to access my label with a meaningful name, I've got to rename it. So here it is. I'm renaming the label, and I'm going to call it message label. Message label. Okay, here it is. Message label. Now, inside the code, my label is going to be called message label, not label 1. Okay. However, it still says label 1 here on the form because down here, if you scroll down to the text, and again, I've alphabetically aligned my properties to the text property, it says label 1, right? If I actually click this down arrow, it shows a lot more space where I can put different text because this could also be a text area as opposed to just a label. Okay, so if I erase this text in here, if I just press delete, it actually shows this label as a blank control. If I click away somewhere, like over here, all of a sudden you're like, hey, where the hell is it? How can I access it? Well, on the property side, if I want to access any control that I have placed on my form, I can click this down arrow, and I can actually access any control right here directly. So I can go click on message label, now it pops up again as the active control that I'm modifying, and then I can modify its properties again. Okay, so don't worry if it disappears. You're like, hey, where the hell did it go? It's right here. Don't worry. It hasn't gone away. Okay, so that's the first thing I've changed, the message label. And if I go back to the PowerPoint presentation, it tells me I need to change my button 1, button 2, and form names to different things. So I recommend you follow along. You do this if you haven't done it already and you're not way ahead of me. And I recommend you probably have done it already because I'm so slow, right? I'm going to do this right now. So I'm going to say my name to push button for my first button and push me, and then button 2 is going to be an exit button and exit, and I'll wait for the hello form in a second. So let's just do that now. Oops. Where did I put it? Oh, there it is. And again, so here's my button name. I'm going to say my push button. Okay. I'm going to click on, I'm going to scroll down to my text field. I'm going to change this to push me, like it recommends. And I see I've actually ended up putting in a space here because it's a string, right? That's what I'm actually putting in here, right? I click on the next button, the previous button changes to accommodate my changes in the control, my properties. This is the exit button. Again, for these, the name, if you notice the name is in parentheses, right? Please don't put spaces in your names. This is a variable. Variables and spaces don't go, okay? Or an object, okay? So we're naming it with no spaces. You can put an underscore if you like, if that's your convention. But I'm just using camel case, upper camel case for my convention. We'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, scrolling down, I go to my text, and I'm going to change to exit. So I'm actually making an exit button. So this is going to exit my form. That's what I want, right? And now I'm going to relay my form itself. I click on the form itself, and I'm going to rename it, right? So here's my name of form. I'm going to rename it here to hello form, right? There's something else that happens that I want you to notice, and I'm going to point it out in a second, because it doesn't change it properly. And my text, I'm going to say, well, you know, hello world, right? Oops, if I can actually spell properly. World. Hello world. I can change to whatever text I want. That's what's going to appear in the title bar of my Windows form. All right, whatever I put here in text when I have my my form, the form itself clicked. But if you notice, look at this. The actual file for the form, it's still called form1.cs, right? I want my files to conform to my name, right? So that makes more sense. Now, for me to do that, I have to go here inside my Solution Explorer, and I'm kind of jumping ahead here in our presentation, but what the hell? And I want to rename. Here's where I rename it. And be careful not to rid yourself of the .cs or you'll have an error. You don't want that. So rename the form itself carefully so that it's like hello form, no spaces. Right now, if you notice the top of my form says hello form.cs, I've actually physically renamed it here, and it's physically renamed my hello form.designer.cs file, my resource files. Everything's been renamed now in the system as well as inside my design view. Okay, so my hello world form has been renamed. Going back. Okay, here we are. So I've done all this stuff. Okay, and I've accessed the Solution Explorer, and we just did that to change the name of the form properly. Okay, now let's write some code, right? Again, when we write some code, a lot of the code is written for us. The stubs for all of our event procedures in C#, VB, and a lot of the other the stuff that you're going to be writing here in Visual Studio, it is automatically written for you. The code block is automatically created for you. All right, so there's nothing for you to physically create on your own. You could do it on your own if you wanted, but Visual Studio has the tools to have it done in a rapid fashion. Okay, so let's see how that works. Now, before we go in there, the old way of calling a comment statement is, and I like calling it comments, it's called a remark in VB or from a Microsoft perspective. You might see it as remark. I like calling it comments, right? Because comment is more something that we're all more familiar with than a remark. So if you hear a remark, comment, same thing. Just like properties, fields, and class variables, they're all the same thing. They mean the same things. Okay. So these are the things that are different statements in your code. You have a comment, you have an assignment statement, you have an ending a program. We're going to do all these things here in these methods. We're going to do things here as we write our code. Okay, so how do we write comments? Well, we have first access of the code part of our form. How do we get there? So go back to Visual Studio. If we double click on the top of the form here, right, it brings up our code window. Right? Wow. And if you notice, there's some stubs that have already been created, right? So here's our class, right? The namespace that we're using is Hello World 2. And we'll talk about namespaces later on in the course, right? It's creating a public method called Hello Form and another private method called Hello Form Load, which actually is an event handler that we're not doing anything with. So when we load the Hello Form, the reason why this came into being is because I double-clicked the form. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. And in fact, if I delete it, right, like this, press delete, because I don't need it, and I still run this thing, it's still going to run if there's no problems. Right? Let's take a look. What's our problem? It's going to bring you to the problem, right? If there is one, it's going to autocorrect it. But see, look, it runs, right? There we go. It says Hello World Form does not contain a definition for Hello Form Load, right? And no extension method Hello Form Load. If I want to step back, we talked about stepping back before, notice I can't undo. I can't undo, right? That's what I'm talking about, guys, all right? So if I double click, oh, look at this. Now because I don't have a Hello Form Load, I can't even see my design. I'm showing you the errors of things that bad things that can happen. You're like, holy crap, what am I going to do now? Right? Well, you can fix it. And again, you can go into your, this is the designer, right? And if you notice, there's pieces missing from the Hello Form. The designer showing you, the design part is all the stuff that places elements on the screen. For example, the push button, the exit button, the label, all this kind of stuff. Right? That's what the designer contains, right? But it really doesn't give us the CS. The CS file has suddenly like disappeared. It doesn't exist, right? Look, I double clicked on this and I got this. I didn't get the file from before. And this is where students get messed up when it comes to Visual Studio 2012. They're like, hey, I took out a procedure, I don't need it, and also I'm screwed. And the truth is, at this point, you would be. Right? I'm just being honest. I'm telling you right now. You'd be like, well, what do I do now? Right? Was that? Start over is what you would do. You start over, right? And this is what we're going to do. We're going to start over. Oh, yeah. I'm telling you right now, try go back and create this file. You'd have to create it. There's ways of doing it. And if I go to Hello Form itself, hear this? See this? This is my Hello Form procedure. And everything else. It has the buttons and the design for my form, right? But it will not allow me to go into and use Visual Studio Tools because I've destroyed the path for me to do so. Okay? And Microsoft, I'll be honest right now, it's pretty solid. It's pretty like conservative when it comes to that kind of stuff. Yes, there are ways of getting it back. I'm not going to show you that way. I want you to learn the hard way for doing this, making mistakes, and going, oh damn, what do I have to do? I got to start over. That's what I got to do. Anyone have any other solution? Any other suggestions?
Keep saving that.
You could. It's not going to really save you in this particular case unless you've done a commit, right? What else? Anyone else? You don't know. That's what I'm trying to tell you guys. This is like bad stuff when you're writing an assignment and all of a sudden, poof, it disappears, right? Save and save often, and save your file in a different location. Otherwise, you're going to have to go through the perils that we're going to go through right now in the next 5 minutes. Okay? But it's okay because we've created such a small application. and I caked out so early that I can do it again. All right. So let's just close the solution and open up a new one. It's good practice anyway. New project. If you follow me along, you'll probably be stuck just like I am, right? So here's Hello World, and I'm going to rename it Hello World 3 in this particular case. And I'll show you how to get rid of all these things and rename them later. I click OK. Again, I have my form application, and I'm going to drag in a label, some practice for you guys. I'm going to align it with the top in this particular case. I'm going to drag in 2 buttons really, really quickly. So here's button 1. Here's button 2. You're seeing it all again, right? Oops, not aligned properly. I move it so it's aligned right. Actually, I like it more in the middle because you know what? The buttons didn't align right for the middle. And I want to put my label right here too. I want to kind of align it to the buttons. There's other ways of doing that, but let's leave it the way it is. I'm going to call this message label, so I'm going to go back down here. First, rename the name of my label to message label. And if I actually click on the buttons first before I change the text, it actually switches. I don't have to scroll up and down here because I'm going to the next property. It's another way of doing it. So I'm going to call this push button, like we said before. Here's my exit button really quickly. And this is how fast you should be able to be comfortable creating your forms. Now I'm going to go back up to label. I'm going to scroll down to my text, get rid of it because I don't need it. Go to my button itself and change my button to push me. Go to my other button, change this to exit. Right? And now we're almost back to where we were. We have to change the form so that the form itself says hello world. Oops. And we're going to go scroll up to the top and change the actual form object name itself to hello form. And we're also going to change it here. Right? We're going to rename this thing so it says hello form.cs, which is going to change everything else. And if you notice, it looks exactly the same as my broken form from before. Now we're back to where we were. I'm going to double click on here, and it's going to take me back here. But guess what I'm not going to do? I've learned from my mistake, and I'm not going to get rid of this stuff. I'm not doing it. Hopefully you guys learned too. All right. So what I need to do though is I need to add some comments on the top of my form. And if you notice, there's all these different libraries that Windows, the Windows Forms and Visual Studio 2012 adds in automatically. All this stuff is added in when you create the Windows form. Don't omit them. Leave them where they are. Yes.
Would WPF use much?
Sorry?
Would WPF use all these libraries?
Other ones. Other ones.
Other ones?
Yeah. Some these ones and other ones.
These are the old ones, right? The WPF is the new.
Correct. Yeah. So I want to add a remark. How do I do it? I go // right? And I say the author. Well, who is the author? That's me, right? You can put your own name in there. The program, right? Well, my program is called Hello World, right? And a description, an app that displays a Hello World message, right? And I'm just kind of going, kind of stating it as I go. Oops, hello world message. If I need 2 lines, you need to actually go down here and create another line. If I need to create more styles in, let's say both English and Spanish eventually. Let's say, oops, my bad. You can do whatever you want in here, but there's going to be basics that I'm going to require from your assignment that you need to put up here in your as a comment. I can also add comments down here. So if I actually scroll down to this area here, I can put comments right here saying, inline comments like, don't touch this. Or face death, right? In the form of wasted time. I could put that in there. You can put whatever you like. Any comments you want. It's like any comments like any other code that you've ever worked with. Okay? This is a double slash that does it. Okay. Let's shift back now that we've got all that done. And if you notice, that's what we've done here in the long way. So this is step 1. Step 2, what we want to do when we create I want to double click on my push button click object. So I go back to my designer, and if I double click on this button, it automatically writes the code block that I need for my push button click event handler. This is it right here. Okay, here it is. And this, I want to add some comments in there, right? Show the hello world message when I click the push button control, right? My comment. Go back here, and now what I'm doing is I'm actually going to use IntelliSense, Microsoft's version of code hinting. Oops. Microsoft's version of code hinting to write my next line. All right, so I'm going to start writing. I know it's a message label, and if I type the first M, if you notice, it's starting to find my my message label for me. Now I've named my message label so it's contextual, so I know what it looks like. Otherwise, it'd be called label 1, like we had it originally, right? If I actually hit tab or click onto it, so let's do the clicking part too. So I'm starting to type it in, message label, and if I actually click onto this as well, that also works. Double click, right? Dot, and if you notice, it's starting to underline it. The dot is the accessor for accessing the methods of my particular object. And remember, even though I've dragged and dropped a label onto my form, the label itself is an object that I've instantiated, and it has methods, right? And one of the methods or properties, if you will, is the text property. So if I type text, here it is, and I hit enter, so it's starting to write it for you, but I need to assign it. I use the equals operator as an assignment to do my assignment. And my message label text is going to be called a string, hello world, apostrophe, or exclamation mark. I have to end this statement because remember, C# will complain if I don't do this. I have to end it with a semicolon. And this is the difference between C# a lot of ways and VB. VB, no semicolons. C#, semicolons. Okay? Python, no semicolons. Right? Java, C++, Objective-C, and many other languages, PHP, semicolons. Okay, I've done this, and I want to go back to my design view. I want to save all. So here on top here, I want to save all my my forms and document in my project. And now, if I run it, so I'm going to run my project by clicking Start. There I am, and there it is, right? My hello world. If I click Push Me, oh, the text of my label, which I've programmed, changes to hello world. Okay, let's just look at that again. So again, I'm going back to my my code view. Here's my code view, and if I've actually said message label, the message label I've defined, dot text, which is the property of the message label, is going to be equal this string hello world with a semicolon. Okay, that's what I've done. I still got to create my exit button too. So let's just do that now. Double click. Okay, so here's my exit button. Now, in many other languages, all right, when you want to close down or do something to the object itself, right, you might have the self keyword. In VB, it's me, for whatever it is, right? In most C# languages and C-style languages, it's this. So let's use that. Knowing that, I type in this, right, which means this object itself, the form. I'm actually accessing the form, not the button, okay, but the form itself. This dot, and what is it going to be? Well, it's going to be close, right? This dot close, and it's got to be in parentheses in the end, because what I'm actually doing is I'm using the method, the close method that belongs to the form itself. I'm accessing that method with the dot accessor that I've got in here. So this dot accessor, the dot, close with parentheses, and I'm accessing the method, the close method of the form. Okay, let's go back to the form. I want to save it again, and I want to run it. And when I do that this time, and here it is, I click exit, and it exits. And if I run it again, I click push button, and then I click exit, and it exits. So I've got a couple of things that I've got my form listening now to a couple of events. One of them is the click button event for my push me, and the other one is the click button event for my exit. Make sense? Very, very quickly. Okay. So we've kind of gone ahead here, a couple of steps. So I've got my form, and I've run it, and it debugs properly. If I make a mistake, right, if I've typed anything wrong within my form itself, as an example, it'll complain nicely. All right, so it won't allow me to go forward unless I've typed all my syntax is correct. The semicolons, they have to be there. I have to have my all the different elements there. Now, one thing I didn't do, I'm going to go back to Visual Studio here, is I forgot to put in some comments. And remember, like I said, what does this thing do? Well, this button closes the application, right? That's what it does for now. Really, it closes the form, and there's only one form for the application. So then when the form is closed and there's only one form for the application, it closes the application down too. Okay? And I'm going to save. Very, very straightforward stuff. Anyone have any questions up until this point? Very, very simple. Hello world. All it does is say hello world in English. I'm going to make it say it in Spanish in a second. I'm going to pause the recording